Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Shama Sundar, Radha Shama Sundar, Radha Shama Sundar, Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Shama Sundar, Radha Shama Sundar, Radha Shama Sundar, Shri Radhe, Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra Jaya Gauranita Jaya Gauranita Gauranita Jaya Gauranita Jaya Gauranita 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 Jaya Gauranita Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mataji. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai.
Harinam Hari Bol.
Pramanande Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Mukunda Datta Prabhu, I think you are there. MKD, I thought that's Prabhu. Mukunda Datta Prabhu.
They are there, but it is mute.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Mukunda Datta Prabhu, you are there. Who is MKD on the line? Is that Mukunda Datta Prabhu or someone else? Can someone identify that?
Prabhuji, Madhuha Krishna Das.
Okay. Okay, then let me try to call Mukunda Datta Prabhu then. I was thinking that's him. Let me see.
So if Mukunda Datta Prabhu is not reachable, MKD can give class today.
Okay, meantime somebody can chant Hare Krishna until that few more minutes. Let me.
Yeah, in the participants.
Punit Prabhu, perhaps you could lead us all in chanting Punit Sethi.
Sure, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Like a chanting?
Yeah, Mahamantra Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutle Shrimate Gopal Krishna Swami Namine. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutle Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami. Namaste. Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Ram Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Ram, Ram Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Ram. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Ram Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Ram Ram Ram. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Ram Ram Ram. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram 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 Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare. Hare Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Hare. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu, please go ahead. Mukunda Datta Prabhu.
Dhanyavad, Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Thank you so much.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Tamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishne Dhamo Bhagate Dharmajnanadibhis Sah Kaunashtratashamesha Puranarko Dhunoditaha Grantharaj Srimad-Bhagavatam Canto 6, 1, text number 1, beginning the history of the life of Ajamila. And we've already read the chapter summary, so today we can do the first verse. We can begin the first verse. There's a lot of commentary on this verse, which actually begins this whole story of Ajamila. Srila Prabhupada has a fairly substantial purport, and Acharyas have written also extensive commentary. And there's reference to the second canto, so it may take some time, but we'll begin at least tonight and try to highlight some of the main points. So, Shri Parikshit Uvacha, Nivritti Marga Katitha, Adau Bhagavata Yatha, Krama Yogopalabdhena, Brahmana Yat Asangskritihi. That means, Maharaj Parikshit said, "O my Lord, O Shukdev Goswami, you have already described in the second canto the path of liberation, Nivritti Marga. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world along with Lord Brahma. Thus, one's repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases." Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Since Maharaj Parikshit Vaishnava, when he heard the description at the end of the fifth canto of the hellish conditions of life, he was very much concerned with how to liberate the conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya and take them back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, he reminded his spiritual master, Shukdev Goswami, about the Marga, or the path of liberation, which he had described in the second canto. Maharaj Parikshit, who at the time of death was fortunate to have met Shukdev Goswami, inquired from Shukdev Goswami about the path of liberation at that crucial time. Shukdev Goswami very much appreciated his question and congratulated him by saying, Variyan eshate prashnaha krito loka hitam nripa atmavit sammataha pungsam shrotavyadishu yaha. Oh, my dear king, your question is glorious because it is very beneficial for all kinds of people. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists. That is Srimad-Bhagavatam, second canto, first chapter in the first verse. Very important verse. Maharaj Parikshit was astonished that the living entities in the conditional stage do not accept the path of liberation, devotional service, instead of suffering in so many hellish conditions. This is the symptom of a Vaishnava. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya evacha. A Vaishnava is an ocean of mercy. Paradukha dukhi. He is unhappy because of the unhappiness of others. Therefore, Parikshit Maharaj, being compassionate toward the conditioned souls suffering in hellish life, suggested that Shukdev Goswami continue describing the path of liberation, which he had explained in the beginning of Srimad-Bhagavatam. The word asangsriti is very important in this connection. Sangsriti refers to continuing on the path of birth and death. Asamsriti, on the contrary, refers to the Nivriti Marg, or the path of liberation, by which one's birth and death cease, and one gradually progresses to Brahmaloka, unless one is a pure devotee who does not care about going to the higher planetary systems, in which case one immediately returns home back to Godhead by executing devotional service. Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti. Parikshit Maharaj, therefore, was very eager to hear from Shukdev Goswami about the path of liberation for the conditioned soul. According to the opinion of the acharyas, the word krama yogo palabdhena indicates that by first performing karma yoga and then jnana yoga, and finally coming to the platform of bhakti yoga, one can be liberated. Bhakti yoga, however, is so powerful that it does not depend on karma yoga or jnana yoga. Bhakti yoga itself is so powerful that even an impious man with no assets in karma yoga, or an illiterate with no assets in jnana yoga, can undoubtedly be elevated to the spiritual world if he simply adheres to bhakti yoga. Mam evaishasyat asamshayah. Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita, chapter 8, text 7, that by the process of bhakti yoga, one undoubtedly goes back to Godhead, back home to the spiritual world. Yogis, however, instead of going directly to the spiritual world, sometimes want to see other planetary systems, and therefore they ascend to the planetary system where Lord Brahma lives, as indicated here by the word Brahmana. At the time of dissolution, Lord Brahma, along with all the inhabitants of Brahmaloka, goes directly to the spiritual world. This is confirmed in the Vedas as follows. Brahmana sahate sarve samprapte pratisanchare parasyante kritatmanaha pravishante param. In other words, because of their exalted position, those who are on Brahmaloka at the time of dissolution go directly back home, back to Godhead, along with Lord Brahma. Om Jnana Timarantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Sri Paragamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalata Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namoste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktaranda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavirapi Gopala Stvipuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadeva Sanpaya Pitwa Hrishyus Tat Priyajanaha. So as Srila Prabhupada is very nicely explained in his purport to this verse, there are two words that are most significant. The first one is Krama Yogo Upalabdhena, and the other one is Asamsriti. So he points out, first of all, in his purport, this is Srila Prabhupada's own appreciation of the situation, that Maharaj Parikshit was compassionately thinking of those who had been described in the previous canto, in this fifth canto, and particularly the hellish planets. By default, if we do nothing to rectify our condition in 2021 in modern society worldwide, we're going to go to hell, because all you have to do is nothing, and the general trajectory of the current dhara of material existence is flowing downwards to hell. The norm in this Kali Yuga is to sinful activity, and in particular, we live in a particularly godless period of time within the Kali Yuga. It's particularly pungent, and the dominant worldview is atheistic, and it's getting worse every day. You've noticed already. So this is the situation that Prabhupada here describes here as the hellish conditions of life. It's freezing cold outside. Everybody you meet may infect you with a deadly disease that you can't do anything about. Your government is pushing atheistic propaganda, and business has no concern for virtue, what to speak of anyone's welfare. So we're in a very tenuous situation. At any minute, we can die as well. Shankaracharya described this, or Govinda Das described this, like a drop of water on a lotus leaf. And we have a short window of opportunity while we are human beings, because we're not always human beings, but now we are human beings. And in the human form of life, we have potential to understand what is dharma. Not only what is dharma, but what is parodharma, because there are two kinds. In Jaimini Rishi's Purvamimamsa Sutra, he raises the prospect, atato dharma jignasa. Now that we're human beings, let us understand what is dharma, because dharmasya hina pashubhisamana. Without that dharma, we're no better than animals. And if we have perfected that dharma as human beings, in other words, if we have acted according to scriptural regulations, if we have followed the regulative principles of the scriptures very strictly, that means in our personal conduct, in our varna, in our ashram, and in terms of cultivating spiritual life, then we can be considered as bona fide humans. And only when we are bona fide humans do we have the adhikar to cultivate knowledge, atma gyan, or atma tattva, knowledge of the spiritual self. And this is called gyan. And this really is the significance of becoming dharmic. The acharyas, even the Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas, most of the Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas, all of the Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas, commenting on chapters 1 through 6 of Bhagavad-gita, they have all made it very clear that in the beginning, we have to turn ourselves from animals into human beings. Once we are human beings, we have to cultivate an awareness of the temporal nature of this world and the eternal nature of our real selves as well. That's those two things are called karma and gyan. So this is the general stage of progression. One has to begin with karma yoga. One has to graduate to cultivate jnana, which leads to liberation. That liberation is described in this verse as asamsriti. Asamsriti. Samsriti means samsara, to crawl through this material world from birth to birth. So asamsriti means apavarga, no more suffering that characterizes material existence, no more repetition of birth and death. And that is the perfection of Gyan. In other words, it's called moksha. Sridhar Swami, in his comments on this verse, he points out, moksho bhavati. Asamsritir moksho bhavati. This is what we mean by asamsriti, to be liberated. But bhakti yoga actually begins on that liberated platform. And so bhakti yoga is in a transcendental category above both of them. And in fact, as Prabhupada points out in his purport here, that bhakti is completely independent of both karma and gyan. So there's a reason that Srila Prabhupada has chosen to dilate on these two terms, asamsriti, and then the next one is krama yoga upalabdha, to gradually move in yoga from a lower to a higher position, to progress in stages, in other words. Krama means sequential, or stages are indicated. And he explains that, as we've already also explained. Karma, jnana, and then finally bhakti. So the point is here, as I'm quoting Prabhupada's purport, bhakti yoga, however, is so powerful that it does not depend on karma yoga or jnana yoga. Bhakti yoga itself is so powerful that even an impious man with no assets in karma yoga or an illiterate with no assets in jnana yoga can undoubtedly be elevated to the spiritual world if he simply adheres to bhakti yoga. That's a big if, actually. And this underscores the need for most of us to cultivate both karma and jnana. It is a part and parcel of bhakti. For example, if we are going to cultivate pure bhakti as human beings, then it's understood that the spiritual master will instruct us, do not behave in an irreligious manner. In other words, cultivate karma. Karma means dharma. In technical language, if we're mentioning karma, it is understood that that means only dharma, not papa, not any other kind of activity. Because in a generic sense, karma also means any activity. But in this sense, as it's used in the Bhagavad-gita and for the most part throughout the Shrimad-Bhagavatam, karma means dharma. So that is the first thing. We have to act according to dharma. And then by doing so, then we actually get realizations. The Bhagavatam begins to make sense to us. Bhagavad-gita, we begin to see what Krishna is saying. And we begin to appreciate the importance of utilizing this short human life for what it can really give us. Aside from just sense gratification, making a lot of money, pampering your false ego, competing with your neighbors, and becoming so-called successful in the material sphere, the real boon of the human form of life is that we can get out of this repeated cycle of birth and death. And we get out in a different way than the non-devotees get out. The non-devotees get out through liberation. That's the best that they can do without mercy from a pure devotee. But as we hear in the Bhagavatam, particularly in this Kali Yuga, by the grace of the holy name of Krishna, two things we get. We get mukta bandha. We are freed from the bondage of this repeated cycle of birth and death. But above that, param vrajet, we go to the supreme destination, which is this transcendental love of Godhead. Prema pum artho mahan. We talk about Chaturvidha Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So Dharma, Artha, and Kama, these are all dealing with the world of karma. And Moksha is the product of the world of Jnana. But nobody talks about bhakti. This is the curious thing. When we're children, we're concerned with foolish play. When we're in our youth, we're concerned with the opposite sex. And when we're in our old age, we're concerned about all of our assets, and we worry about them. But at no point, we are told, does anyone really concern himself? Pare brahmani kopi na sakta. Nobody becomes attached to the absolute truth. This is the bewildering play of Maya, the bewildering power of the avaranatmika shakti and sankshevatmika shaktis of Maya. We become thrown into material existence as a result of our either curiosity or envy of the Supreme Lord. And once we're in this material tabernacle, then we become completely covered over and enveloped by it. Just like smoke covers a fire, or like dust covers a mirror, or like a womb covers an embryo. These are three modes of this avarana that we can experience, but everybody is covered over by Maya. So human life is great value. Now, one thing we should point out here in regards to Srila Prabhupada's purport is this very significant point that he makes. Bhakti yoga is so powerful that it's independent of both karma and jnana. Why do we emphasize karma and jnana so much? Why does Krishna do so in Bhagavad-gita? Why does Srila Prabhupada do so? Why is it important if bhakti is actually transcendental and independent of them? In fact, Narad Bhakti Sutra, Narad Muni actually explains that not only is bhakti independent of both karma and jnana, but the bhakti is also the active ingredient of both karma and jnana. There's some degree of the tendency to surrender to an authority if we decide, since we always have a choice, to follow the injunctions of the scriptures and engage in dharmic behavior. That is a low-level degree of surrender to Krishna, but it is a beginning stage. And this is why we say that karma yoga is the beginning stage of bhakti yoga. Similarly, if one has acted piously enough and his intelligence and his heart matures or ripens, we can say, to the point that he realizes the futility of wasting time going up and down on the karmic treadmill, so to speak, then that person can cultivate jnana, and that is also a very low-level manifestation of bhakti, indirect manifestation of bhakti. Krishna says, jnani tuatmaiva me matam, that he considers the jnani to be most dear to him. Krishna says this in Bhagavad-gita also. So they're not independent of bhakti, but bhakti is independent of those two things. Still, it is the very nature of bhakti that it's going to manifest the fruits of these two processes automatically if we persevere in pure devotional service. Krishna says this again in Bhagavad Gita, that a person who adheres to the path of bhakti, he doesn't lose the results of performing austerities or giving in charity or studying the Vedas or any of the other paths that are endorsed throughout the Shastras in the realms of karma and jnana. A devotee doesn't lose the effects of those things. In fact, his devotion should manifest those effects. And it will manifest those effects to the extent that he is nishkinchana, really surrendered and without material desires. Prahlad Maharaj has explained this as well, that a person will manifest all the good qualities of the demigods which is to say that the demigods themselves will come and sit in his heart and stay there, along with their good qualities, if he has embraced this principle of surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in all sincerity and in all practical application. If a person is really acting according to what he hears from a bona fide spiritual master, then automatically he's going to be delivered by that process alone. He doesn't have to worry about karma and gyan. But the point is then, I raised a question, why do our acharyas keep talking about it? And why does Prabhupada raise this idea here? The point is, as far as I can see, is that one should recognize or appreciate that one's devotional service must go through these stages. Krama yogo palabdhena. Even though we're practicing pure bhakti or trying to practice pure bhakti, independent of attachment to karma and gyan, or dependence, I should say, on karma and gyan, our bhakti will go through these stages. And that's why we hear, for example, in Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says, he talks about divya karma, janma karma chame divyam. And similarly, we are praying every day in Guru Puja, divya gyan, hriday prakashita, that we're praying for divya karma and divya gyan. Karma and gyan will be there. There's no doubt about it. You cannot exist without them. But they're divya karma, divya jnana. That is why they're independent of these mundane counterparts. So when we talk about the karma yogi or the jnana yogi, we mean those persons who are attached to those paths and not willing to graduate from those paths to embrace the principle of pure devotional service. That is what it means really to be a karma or a jnani. But within bhakti yoga, within pure surrender to Krishna, we should also not be illusioned and think that we don't have to worry about our devotional, we don't have to monitor our devotional service to check to see that we are indeed going through the stages of benefit that accrue from those other practices. I hope it's clear what I'm explaining. Prabhupada says bhakti yoga is itself so powerful that even an impious man with no assets in karma or gyan, if he assiduously adheres to the process of bhakti under the guidance of a bona fide sponsor, a pure devotee of the Lord, then he will also be elevated to the spiritual world. And I said that that's a big if. Why? Yesham twantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvanva moha nirmukta bhajante mam drhavrataha. Krishna says, those who can sustain a mature commitment to pure devotional service are the persons who have already gone through this, have already, I should say, accrued the results of practicing karma, that is to say dharma, and cultivating jnana, or knowledge of the difference between spirit and matter. This is the person who can adhere to the process of bhakti with, as I said, mature and sustained conviction. Other persons cannot do it. This is the point. It's the subtext of that verse, which Krishna doesn't state directly, but it's clearly implied. If you are not pious, and if you have not realized that, at least in theory, that you are not this material body, if you don't really believe it, that is to say, then you'll not be able to sustain. You'll not be able to persevere. You'll not be able to adhere, to use Prabhupada's words in this purport, to the process of bhakti. This is a very, very important point. I believe that Srila Prabhupada gave so many instructions on these topics, particularly karma. He was really stressing dharma, varnashram dharma in particular, within the last few years of his presence on this planet. From about 1974 to 1977, one Dr. Burke Rockford did a survey and said that Prabhupada gave roughly 80% of his instructions on this topic of varnashram dharma during those last few years. And so much so that just before he left this world, he told us that it was the remaining 50% of his mission. Why? If bhakti yoga is above these things, then why do we need to worry about them so much? Why was Prabhupada pushing so much on it? The answer is that bhakti yoga is indeed above these things, but not all bhakti yogis are above these things, is the point. If we have tried to practice vikarma yoga, that is to say, to sustain an impious, default sinful mode of existence, as we described in the beginning, and try to dovetail that towards bhakti, we will find out eventually that it doesn't work. Either we will be taken out of devotional service or those anarthas will be taken out of our lives. But this situation is an impossible one. There is no such thing as vikarma yoga. There is only karma yoga. That's a very important thing. And secondly, as we described already, the spiritual master is there. What is he giving us? He's giving us divya gyan. He's awakening us to the reality of our own situation in this material world and our potential situation in the spiritual world as well. That gyan is necessary. It's called sambandha. Relationship is based on that gyan, sambandha gyan. Without that sambandha gyan, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we will not be able to chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra without offense. It is absolutely necessary. So dharma is necessary for establishing sambandha gyan. Sambandha gyan is necessary. It's the substrate, we can say, of abhideya, which is the practice of devotional service, through which, abhideya, we come to the prayojana, the gati, ultimately, param gati, parodharma. That is pure love of Godhead, liberated bhakti. From the end of chapter 18 in Bhagavad-gita, we've heard already that Krishna says, when we are on the liberated platform, then we can take to param bhakti, mad bhaktim labhate param. So both of these things are very, very important. And this is all indicated here, according to the acharyas, Prabhupada is quoting, by the words krama yoga upalabdhena. Now, there's also a reference back to the second canto. And that has been described by Shukdev Goswami. Sometimes yogis want to, they want to deliberately, they're called karma mishra bhaktas or jnana mishra bhaktas or yogis, non-devotional yogis. They entertain some sort of goal, they have some attachment, they have some ambition or aspiration, which is a little bit outside of devotional service, as much as that's possible. So for those persons, when they, assuming that they have been pious to begin with, when they perfect their realizations in Gyan, then they may go to Brahmaloka, and they may reside there in Brahmaloka, where everyone is basically Siddha. And when Brahma himself, when his life comes to an end, then at that time they also go with Brahma back to the spiritual world. That has been described back in the second canto. And maybe later we can discuss that further. But there's really no need to maintain that kind of attachment. If one simply focuses on bhakti yoga, one automatically gets the result of these other processes, because bhakti yoga does subsume these other processes, and we should not lose focus about that and be confused and try to do the wrong thing. Okay, so that's all described here. Mame vaishyasi asamshayaha. Krishna says, without a doubt, if you have practiced this very faithfully, then you will undoubtedly go back to home, back to Godhead, the spiritual world. You notice this is in chapter 8, verse 7, just a few shlokas after Krishna has reminded Arjuna that the impious persons don't really persevere in bhakti yoga. This is history. This is ISKCON history. We've seen it, at least I've seen it, over the last half century or so. Almost none of the persons, I think, let me count. In fact, none of the persons who were initiated with me back in 1977, they're not here anymore. They're all gone. I'm the only one who's left. And that pattern is pretty general. Srila Prabhupada initiated 5,000 disciples, you'll be lucky if you can find a tenth of that now in ISKCON, 500 disciples. A few years ago, we had the 40th anniversary of the opening of the Krishna-bhakti temple in Vrindavan, and we felt ourselves very blessed to have the presence of over 100 of Prabhupada's disciples, because they don't really come around so much. You don't get that kind of concentrated association very often. It was kind of surreal, because after, say, 20 or 30 years, I found myself dancing in an ecstatic kirtan surrounded by God brothers, the same ones that we were dancing with so many decades ago. Anyway, the point is that even in ISKCON, we've seen that most devotees leave. In fact, we can even say that many of their gurus also leave. It's happened. So why is that? We have to give serious attention to this principle and think about what Prabhupada has explained here regarding Krama Yoga Upalabdha. How our advancement, even in Bhakti Yoga, is going to go through these sequences of dharma and jnana. It really is necessary. Otherwise, what we're practicing is something that is not Shastric. Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatri Vidhim Vina Aikantiki Harer Bhakti Utpadaiva Kalpate. Sometimes these concoctions really is what they are. They're tried to be passed off as pure devotional service, that we're transcendental to karma and we're transcendental to jnana. Well, no, our process is transcendental. And to the extent that we have embraced that process fully, we are also transcendental. But if we haven't, the fact of the matter remains, we ourselves are not that transcendental. This has been stated by Srila Prabhupada on so many occasions. A very famous example of this is Valentine's Day, 1977. Srila Prabhupada was discussing with several disciples who was there. Harishari was there, Satsarup Maharaj was there, and others. And they were giving these arguments because Prabhupada, this was one of those occasions in the later years in which Prabhupada was pushing particularly on dharma. And so the arguments were coming. Well, you know, Naham Vipro na Chananapatir Napi Vaisho na Shudro. Somebody said that Prabhupada, you know, we're not belonging to any of these designations. And Srila Prabhupada countered, yes, that's a fact, but do you realize that? Otherwise, why are they falling down? Srila Prabhupada saw his disciples were not able to keep their initiation vows. They were not able to maintain even their ashrams, not just the sannyasis. Even the householders were not faithful in their marriages or not responsible in their marriages. And in our ordinary affairs also, we have to be very attentive to remain dharmic, because otherwise we will be sullied by sinful reactions, and those sinful reactions will militate against the ability that we have to cultivate Atma Tattva, which is the substrate of pure devotional service. So everything we do has great significance. Nothing is rejected. Everything is accepted that is favorable for pure devotional service. How do we know what is favorable and what is unfavorable? We are instructed by the spiritual master. We don't have to question. We simply have to follow. All right. So there's more that can be said, and I will say more, but it seems as if we have to wait until another session. I wanted to leave a little time now for questions, if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we can go on and explain some more. As I said, there is very extensive commentary here in the beginning of the 6th canto, not only on these principles in general, but on the story of Ajamila in particular. And it's very interesting to see what virtually all of the acharyas have said about this section of the Bhagavatam. Very, very important. Ajamila Upakhana is very famous. You have maybe noticed, if you're very keen about listening to Srila Prabhupada personally, then Srila Prabhupada spends so much time lecturing on this particular section of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Of course, he was translating it, so it's natural. Srila Prabhupada tended to speak from the areas of the Bhagavatam that he was translating at the time. So we find 6th canto, 7th canto in particular, he spent a lot of time on. not so much on the 5th canto, not so much on the other cantos as well, because devotees were young then. But he spoke extensively on the 1st canto, a little bit on the 2nd canto, and quite a bit. 3rd canto, Kapila Dev, he also spoke quite a bit. And then the 6th and 7th cantos are also very much covered by Srila Prabhupada. But this Ajamila, the story is very significant in terms of chanting the holy name. This is a point that we'll be discussing in the coming verses. All right, does anyone have any questions about anything that we've said so far?
Amritanand Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
So what I've understood is that Bhakti Yoga, Krishna Consciousness, we are in a gradual process of purification of whatever is our conditioning. And then today you introduced to say that there is karma and there is jnana, yoga. And because we still aren't purified or have that level of consciousness, these two processes also are necessary. So my first question is my understanding correct? And if so, then how is it that one doesn't just get stuck in either the karma part or the jnana part, but continues to progress towards bhakti?
This is an excellent question. You've understood. I would a little bit maybe tweak your understanding by saying that they're not actually necessary. Karma and jnana are not necessary. We're only practicing bhakti. This is the main point of my answer, that we should not view it that we are practicing karma. In other words, we should not conceive of dharma as something separate from bhakti. And we should not conceive of this divya as something separate from bhakti, because otherwise, then, as you said, we will get stuck in those processes. If we perceive them as being separate, then it will be a problem. And in fact, bhakti is separate from these things, and it is above these things. We should practice the principles of the regular principles given in the scripture to be dharmic. That we should do for sure, but we should not depend on that, because we cannot depend on that. We don't have assets in dharma, mostly. As I said, all you have to do is fit in to the modern society and you will be a dharmic, guaranteed. Similarly with gyan, we should cultivate gyan. We will cultivate gyan, because the Bhagavatam is full of it. But we should not depend on gyan as something extrinsic, as something separate from teachings of the spiritual master. So what is it that keeps us in line? What is it that keeps us from wandering off into some non-devotional worlds? That is the order of the spiritual master. Always, if we are very strictly adhering to the orders of the spiritual master, then we will advance properly. So it's really not a question of introducing something extrinsic to bhakti, or even integrating something extrinsic to bhakti. Rather, it's a question of understanding the orders of the spiritual master and strictly following those. In this way, bhakti yoga is independent of karma and jnana, even though it's, as I said earlier, subsumes them. Subsume is a very expressive word in this regard, I think, because we will include karma and jnana in bhakti, but that karma and jnana does not remain mundane once it is engaged in bhakti. Brahmaharpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmahagno, Brahmanahutam, Brahmaivatena Gantavyam, Brahma Karma Samadhina. Krishna says in chapter 4 of the Gita that when we engage in a sacrifice, the ghee becomes transcendental, the firewood becomes transcendental, the mantras are transcendental, the priest is transcendental, everything is transcendental, because the aim is yajna, sacrifice to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And similarly in Bhakti Yoga, whatever is favorable, that being determined by the order of the spiritual master, becomes transcendental as well. So we should not think that it's mundane. Sometimes, for example, again, back to this question of varnashram, well, Mahaprabhu said, Ego Bhaya, this is external thing, he told Ramananda Rai. He wanted to hear further. So that's true, but it doesn't mean that it's something that is not part of Bhakti Yoga. In the 6th canto of the Vishnu Purana, Maharaj Sagar was concerned, just as Parikshit Maharaj is concerned in this passage, with the sufferings of the conditioned souls. And he knew that it was his responsibility as a pious king to ultimately somehow bring his constituents into pure devotional service. And he couldn't figure out how to do that. So he went to his guru, Ardava Muni, and he asked him, how can I bring these people, all of my prajas, into a pure devotional service? Many of them are not ready, it seems. So what to do? And long answer was given in the 8th chapter of it's in the 3rd canto of the Vishnu Purana, not the 6th canto. In the 8th chapter, the whole 8th chapter is an answer given by Ardava Muni to this question. And that, of course, includes the famous verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes so often, Varnashramacharvata Purashena Parapaman, ityadi, that people have to be engaged in a culture. Culture means cultivation in a social superstructure. We want to say infrastructure, social infrastructure that is actually favorable to pure devotional service. Until you have that support from the external society, it's always going to be a conflict between trying to meet the needs of social needs and trying to meet your spiritual needs. Therefore, it's he makes very strongly states this case that this is the only way to please Lord Vishnu. It's like this. If you want to get, I don't know, East Coast roads, but in Los Angeles, if you want to get from Los Angeles to San Francisco, you have to take Highway 5 straight up. And so if we say that Highway 5 is the way to get to San Francisco, that's quite correct. And if we say that the feeder road at such and such an exit is the only way to get to San Francisco, that's also correct. You see? So it's like this. This analogy was given by, ironically, by Hridayananda Maharaj. It's like a feeder road. You cannot get on a freeway without getting the access road. The access road is like Varnashram Dharma. Or in another stage, we can say it's Gyan. They're both in the same category. They facilitate bhakti. They don't aggravate bhakti. If you try to live a human form of life without dharma and without gyan, your life will not really be human, because the defining characteristic of human life is dharma and gyan. It's ironic and it's counterintuitive, because we've heard so many verses. For example, what is that? Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadya navratam anukulena krishnanushilanam bhakti rutama. Rupa Goswami tells us the defining feature of pure devotional service is that it's devoid of karma and gyan. And here we're discussing how it's full of karma and gyan. This is inconceivable. Achintya bheda bheda. It is not full of mundane karma and is not full of mundane gyan, but it is full of both karma and gyan that have been dedicated to the lotus feet of Krishna. This is the definition of real renunciation. If something can be used in Krishna's service and is favorable for Krishna's devotional service, and again, we define that use and favor by the orders of the spiritual master, then it must be adopted. It is no longer mundane. It becomes transcendental at that point, as we stated already. Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir, Brahma Karma Samadhina, ityadi. So we should maintain this appreciation that Varnashram Dharma, as the instructions on Varnashram Dharma given all throughout the Bhagavatam, which rejects mundane Kaitava Dharma, these things are not mundane. And the orders of the spiritual master are never mundane. The orders of the spiritual master are never extrinsic to pure devotional service. Rather, they're the active ingredient of devotional service, the active principle of spiritual life. Devotional service without the orders of the spiritual master, devotional service without the injunctions of the Shastra, that is a useless disturbance to society. And we see our society is disturbed when people try to introduce things that are not coming from Srila Prabhupada. I hope does it make things a little clear?
Yes, the highway analogy made it very clear, Prabhuji. So my last question regarding this same thought is, we also hear the pastime of Mahaprabhu and the illiterate South Indian Brahmin. He was holding the
Yes.
upside down. So such souls are very rare and far few in between. But for the general populace, it is that access road, correct?
Yes. And we have that story in the Chaitanya Charitamrita just to remind us that don't think so highly of your karma and your gyan that it's going to obstruct your appreciation of the real focus. Tad Vishnu paramam param pashyanti suryaha. Those who are godly, they don't lose sight of the real goal, which is parodharma, pure devotional service. And stories like that, they illustrate for us very clearly. It doesn't matter if you have faith. What is that famous last word of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad? Literally the last verse, concluding verse of that Upanishad. You know the verse I'm thinking of? Yasya Devi Bhaktir Yatha Devi Tatha Guru Tasya Hirthaha Prakashante Mahatmanaha. If one has absolute faith in spirit, equal faith in the spiritual master and Krishna, then all the Shastra's import will be revealed to him. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whose disappearance day was yesterday, at least here in Vrindavan, he was the greatest scholar. He was awarded the title Siddhanta Shiromani, Bhaktisiddhanta, because he actually he updated the Surya Siddhanta to make it relevant for people's actual needs. And he knew the Shastras so well. He was a Sanskrit scholar. He knew so many things. And yet his spiritual master was illiterate and could not even spell his name, could not even write his name. How is that so? This is the point. It doesn't depend on that. Because he knew in his heart, Gaurkishore Das Babaji, he had internalized all the instructions given by Narottam Das Thakur simply by hearing. This is something that Krishna also explains in chapter 3 of Bhagavad-gita more than once, that even if one is very simple and not so padhe likhe, as we say in Hindi, not so big scholar or anything, that still that person, if he just has faith and faithfully adheres to the orders of the spiritual master, then he also will be delivered, no problem. But most of us don't really have that deep faith. This is the problem. So we really have to give attention to take help from wherever we can get it. This is the real principle. We have to take help from wherever we can get it, and we have to recognize in order to do that, that we need help. So if we're proud, the way that neophytes usually are, then that's a problem. And as we slowly advance by following the process to whatever degree we can, then we will be enlightened and we will see that actually I need more help. And then we will be open to receiving it when it comes. Hope that's okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, Prabhuji,
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Devakinandan Prabhu has a question. So before that, so you are talking about, Prabhu, I think from 12th chapter also we see that Yastu Sarvani Karmani Mai Sanyasya Matpra. And after that also Krishna is mentioning, first you do the pure devotions of this, but if we cannot, then he is giving the other options using this karma and jnana, coming to that pure path. So we are on that line, basically.
Everybody, krama. This is the word used in this verse. Krama means sequentially, stages. You have to begin where you are. And we were discussing this last night also, same principle. For somebody, the best thing he can do, the most surrender that he can eke out of his heart is to follow the injunctions of the karma dharma shastras, the karma yogi. That is the beginning. For us, it's a very slight beginning, but for that person, it's a big sacrifice, and Krishna appreciates that. So he gets the benefit from it. And this is another reason why we can't judge others, because we really don't know what's in another person's heart and how they're negotiating their spirituality with Krishna. But it's true. It works like that. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhu. Devakinandan Prabhu, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Question coming to mind. You mentioned very succinctly about the early followers of His Divine Grace. You said there were 5,000 and difficult to find 500, which means many of them could not follow some process, which I don't know. I have a question from your side that they were not able to follow the Varnashram system. They were not following Prabhupada's instructions. But that's just a reference point. That's the foundation. But then I'm talking about myself today. Fast forward, 50 years now today. Is it possible that me as a devotee can also fall in the same trap, and I also become insignificant and become that number, 4,500, not become part of 500? So on a practical level, my question is, the punchline here is, on a practical level, what mistake they have made, which I, as a devotee, need to avoid today as an ISKCON devotee, not to make the same mistake, so I don't become part of 4,500. Please give some one practical, philosophical, I think I heard, and very beautifully elucidated, but some practical one example that can touch my heart and others also.
Yes, very good question. Practical questions are usually the best questions. So, the standard answer for almost any such question about Krishna consciousness, how do I make advancement? The standard answer is always the same. You seek out the association of more advanced devotees, and you very faithfully and submissively serve them and carry out their instructions. More advanced devotees means you have to believe that they're more advanced also. It's not enough just to get somebody who's popular or find somebody who's respected or somebody who is supposed to be very advanced. You have to actually, in your own heart, have faith in that person. This is the point. The definition of a more or less advanced devotee is it pivots around faith. One whose faith is similar to yours but deeper than yours. This is what Rupa Goswami says in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu. He has to be similar to you so that you can relate, but his faith has to be deeper than yours in order for him to elevate you. And you have to see that. And that combination is, that is what it means when we say that the teacher has to be potent, so to speak, and the disciple has to be fertile, so to speak. Then it will work. So you have to find a more advanced devotee that you have faith in, and you have to associate with that person or persons, because there's no bar on association. More devotees we can find, powerful association, the more we will advance. And the more that we keep ourselves in that powerful association, then we will be safeguarded. We can only fall away if we allow ourselves to become slack about that, or if we offend devotees. This is another danger. It's not enough just to put yourself in advanced devotees association if you're animalistic, and you will offend them. That is another problem. Therefore, we said in the beginning, be dharmic and cultivate gyan. These things will allow you to take good advantage of devotional association, and that is the fast track for making spiritual advancement. Mahat sevam dwaram ahur vimuktehe. Rishabdev tells us it is the doorway to liberation. And even a moment's association, we hear from 1st Canto, Chapter 2, as well as 6th Canto, even momentary association with a person who's really advanced, nishkama bhakta, that is enough to elevate us. What to speak of if we can get long-term association of pure devotee? So the best way to avoid obstacles And to be kept safely on the right track is to surround ourselves with more advanced devotees association, always. That's a simple answer, but it's a very, very deep one as well. And it's an eternal principle. Even when we go back to Godhead, we still depend on the association of more advanced devotees. It is a fact. Is that satisfactory?
Yeah, that's all right. I wanted to hear one practical example of, the past and the present. What mistake was made in the past, and what mistake we're still making today, and
yes.
So then how we can avoid that mistake. So that something. Yeah, I hope you see what I'm asking.
Well, if we want to look at the past, Srila Prabhupada discusses the breakup of the Gaudiya Math and how exactly that transpired. And it's relevant because, we can see, practically speaking, ISKCON in 2021 also seems pretty fractious. And so it's something that we want to be aware of. But I don't remember who it was, whether it was, maybe it was Sridhar Maharaj or one of Prabhupada's other godbrothers. Somebody asked him, what happened? Tell us, what happened with the Gaudiya Math? What was the problem that led them to break up the way that they did? And he answered in one word. He said, Adhikara Ulanghana. Adhikara Ulanghana. That means they had such a high estimation of their own qualification that they stepped beyond what they were actually fit to do. In the 11th canto, we find Krishna tells Uddhava this similar thing. He says, that one should not do more than he's qualified to do, neither one should do less than he's qualified to do. One has to be properly situated in his own level of adhikar. Adhikar means prerogative. It's a right that you have, but it's also a qualification that you have. And it's very important to have a sense of that. And that is one of many reasons that we accept a bona fide spiritual master, because he will tell us that, what you're qualified to do and what you're not qualified to do. If you attempt to do more than you're actually able to do, or if you have a higher estimation of your own advancement than you really are, then it's a problem. You will probably fall down. And this is what happened with Gaudiya Math. Now, the agents of that destruction, that's maybe what you're asking, since you keep emphasizing the practicality. They can be multifarious. Depends. One person's weakness is lust. Another person will fall for greed. Another person is envious. Another person is a politician. Another person has this, has that. So many, we're all individuals. These are the reasons that we have a bona fide spiritual master. He's going to custom tailor our trajectory in Krishna consciousness through his very pinpointed instructions. And that's on the basis of his empathy. Empathy only comes from real spiritual advancement. You can't fake it, you can't practice it, neither can you learn it. It's a gift from above. But every pure devotee has this. Certainly Srila Prabhupada had it. I saw Tamal Krishna Goswami had it as well. Within 2 minutes, anybody he was dealing with, he knew everything about that person. What are his attachments? What are his fears? What is his level of adhikar? Whether he's been sinful or not, everything he could tell like that. He was so sharp. So a pure devotee, Krishna says, the best of the devotee, the best yogi, Krishna says in chapter 6, text 32, is the person who has this empathy. On the basis of that insight into another person's heart, the spiritual master will give you very relevant instructions, practical instructions. If that's what you're asking for, then the answer is the spiritual master. Is
Thank you.
Good?
Thank
or
you.
Should I dilate more?
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma. Bhakti only lives Two places Bhakti lives. Left lotus foot, right lotus foot. That's it. Therefore we say, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Kuriya Aikya. Whatever is in your heart should be the same thing as what's coming out of your Guru's mouth. If there's a difference, that's a problem. Eradicate it. Okay?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think Sudhakar Prabhu has a question, if you have time. Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. What is Surya Siddhanta book about?
This is an astronomical text about the, astrology and astronomy are very closely related. So because we have, every once in a while, there's a leap year. So, all the charts and all the calculations, they have to be updated. And this is before computers, mind you. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he actually calculated that. It's been many, many years since this work was updated. So he actually did that.
I'm asking because of the word Surya in it. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, that I don't know. I'm not so familiar with it.
Next question, Prabhuji, about Mahaprabhu's Srirangam pastime with the person reading Bhagavad-gita upside down. Can it be said that Mahaprabhu was not giving enough credit to the Brahmana people who were chanting the mantras and doing the Brahmanical process?
It can be said if we want to find fault in Mahaprabhu, but I don't want to criticize like that. It's pretty much automatic that if a person is nicely chanting Sanskrit, people will appreciate. It's pretty much automatic, but it's not automatic if a person who is struggling, but very sincere, is also trying to do his best. It's not automatic that people will appreciate him because people are pretty external much of the time, and they lack empathy, which is required in this case to appreciate the devotion. Let me quote a verse that we hear from Chaitanya Bhagavat that helps to illustrate this further. Murkho vadati vishnaya, dhiro vadati vishnave, upayos tat samam purnyam bhavagrahi janardhana. In very simple Sanskrit means, you understand. So a person who doesn't know Sanskrit, he will say Namaha Vishnaya, but that's an improper declension. The proper grammatical form should be Namaha Vishnave. So the Dhiro Vati Vishnave, he says it right. But they both get the same credit if they are pure devotees. Why? Bhavagrahi Janardana. Janardana is one who appreciates what's in your heart. Just like in the Far East, now they're being persecuted by the Communist Party of China, just like Americans are being persecuted by the Communist Party of China. But those devotees who are trying to become Krishna consciousness in China, they're chanting Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Lama, Lama, Hare Hare. But Krishna appreciates that chanting. You cannot fault them for improper pronunciation. You see, Krishna appreciates if they're sincere, and they get the benefit of that, even though it's from a technical point of view, it's improper. So Krishna consciousness is not a technique. There's an internal process of surrender that's going on. And it's not so easy to see that. It's very subtle. Therefore, people miss it. And that's why these stories are given again and again and again throughout our Shastras. Not only throughout the Shastras, but throughout history. The Lord has always arranged, not only in his incarnations, such as Ramchandra, who enlisted the help of so many monkeys, but so many devotees and so many acharyas, they come from the most backward circumstance, impossible odds they're working against. And yet it's meant that way to demonstrate that if you have this essential qualification, it's meant to demonstrate what is the essential qualification. Pure faith, sincere devotion. If you have that, then all the other things can be adjusted automatically. So these stories are there to illustrate and to emphasize, emphasize that point. Is that okay?
Okay, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. May I ask a quick question?
Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mukunda Prabhu, for your class. I appreciate it so much. I'm wondering if I've derived the correct understanding from what you've said about the karma yoga and jnana yoga being inclusive within bhakti yoga. Is that perhaps the reason why souls who are immersed in the karma yogic process or the jnana yogic process have a certain level of satisfaction? Also some frustration that might push them further along the path, but there is also some satisfaction. Is that because it is part of the bhakti process?
Well, that's a good question. Let's revisit the definition I gave for karma. Karma, as I said, means dharma, and dharma also means punya. Punya, by its very nature, means you're doing things that make you happy in the long term. Maybe in the short term it's austere, but in the long run, punya makes you happy. And if you're happy with yourself, and if you're well adjusted psychologically, physically, in every respect, that is the manifestation of punya. And that is required, because unless and until one comes to that state, it will be difficult to practice bhakti, because one's distracted, or one's confused, or one is discouraged in some way. Mm-hmm. So it in some sense, I don't want to say that that it's necessary to cultivate these things, because then that creates the impression that they're separate from bhakti, which they're not. Mm-hmm. If we're under the orders of the spiritual master. But it's just to emphasize the importance of that verse, chapter 7, text 28, which I quoted already. Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvanva mohanirmukta bhajante mam drhavrataha. If you're situated in piety, you will be well situated to practice. You will have adhikar for practicing bhakti. And if you're situated in Gyan, then you will not be bewildered by what Krishna calls dvandva.
Hare Krishna.
Of dualistic existence in this material. This good, that's bad. So one has to become dharmatma. This is the point. Or punyatma is another way to put it. And then yeah, I think the answer to your question is yes. These things are very beneficial for bhakti, but we want to be careful about that and not create any impression that they're separate from bhakti, or that we need to do anything outside of bhakti in order to realize the fruits of these other paths. Is that clear?
Yes, it is, Prabhu. If I ask a quick question in correlation to that, then what is it that keeps certain souls very satisfied at that, maybe what we would call the mode of goodness, or a very pious existence, doing charitable goods, leading a very, religious, so-called religious life, not harming others, etc. Why would one soul be very satisfied at that level and not furthering it to develop deeper bhakti, and another soul would not be satisfied at that level? What keeps one soul from searching further than the other?
Excellent question. Very, very nice. Very subtle considerations also. Okay. Well, once I was in Mudbidri, South Kannada district in South India, and there was a community that I stayed with, all Madhva Brahmins, and they were all going to a Venkataraman temple every morning, and they were having their morning program, and after puja they would do sankirtana, and it was practically just like an ISKCON temple. And I was very impressed. And then one Brahmin invited me for lunch into his house, and he was speaking in Sanskrit with his family members at home. And I was just marveling at the incredible sattva of the people in this particular neighborhood. But I noted at the same time that they were so happy and so satisfied and so pious that there was not a lot of intensity about preaching Krishna consciousness, or even getting out of this situation and going back to Godhead. So to answer the second part of your question, the first question, what is it that satisfies one about sattva guna? Well, Sattvaguna itself has that nature, and the very satisfaction that accrues from cultivation of Sattvaguna can be further entangling, Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita. It has that downside to it.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of the question, what is it that distinguishes that kind of person from a person who may or may not be pious, but who really has faith in the process and feels some intensity to go back home, back to Godhead? I would say that's mercy. And mercy from his divine grace, Srila Prabhupada. One disciple quoted this verse to Srila Prabhupada that I've quoted thrice now, Yesham Twantagatam Papam. And he asked Prabhupada that, you know, Krishna says this in Bhagavad Gita, that it's the pious people who can really take to bhakti and persevere in bhakti. So then what about us? Some of you may know this story. It was Guru Kripa, my god brother, who asked this question to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada stopped and looked at him in the eyes and said, I created your good fortune. So, you know, E Brahmanda Brahmite Kono Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Kripa Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. When we come across a pure devotee and we have some modicum of faith or piety, which can render us responsive to what we hear from that pure devotee, then our path of, you know, sincere advancement in bhakti yoga is begun. And we have to be careful. We have to be very careful, because having been awakened to the reality and the value of Krishna consciousness, the more we advance in bhakti, the more we accrue piety, and that piety can condition us. We have to be very careful of what Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls bhakti unmukhi anarthas. Anarthas that are produced of the piety that characterizes bhakti. There is a class of anarthas that are produced from our own practice of Krishna consciousness. Ironically enough, it happens. That is because it is punya shavana kirtana. It is a transcendental process, but it's also a punya process. So know that if someone doesn't take seriously to Krishna consciousness, but you know, he doesn't give up Krishna consciousness at the same time, that person gets only the punya, and he doesn't go back to God. He'll go to the heavenly planets if he's not perfect in pure devotion. So bhakti itself can produce anarthas, and certainly the sattva guna will not engender a sense of urgency to get out of this material world, because it conditions us with a mode of happiness, Krishna says in several places throughout the Bhagavad-gita. Is that satisfactory answer? Does it clear up your question?
Very. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anything else?
Anyone else has questions? Yeah, I was also thinking, probably in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, we see that also from 40th or 41st verse, few verses, Krishna talks about this auspicious activities, and Prabhupada delineates in the purport 3 categories. First category is of fruitive activities, the karma kanda, and then within that also one who is looking for to enjoy, and one who is not attached to the results. Then the second category is liberation. Third category is on the path who are performing bhakti. So the second and third category will be qualified for the next level, but the first category will not be. They may not get. There is no guarantee for them to get a human birth. But the first, second, and third category, Suchinam Srimatam, we had done further verse referring to.
Yes. Well, yeah, and at the same time, we hear that by taking initiation and, initiating the process of Krishna consciousness as a human being, one is guaranteed to not take less than a human birth. You may get a higher birth than human. You may go to the heavenly planets if you're not successful, perfect in Krishna consciousness, but you will not go down. That's a fact. That is another advantage of practicing dharma in general. Is something that the Acharya is commenting on the early, say, first 6 verses of chapter 18. They say this, that the benefit of practicing dharma strictly is that you will at least not be degraded. You will at least stay where you are, and most likely you will be elevated. So that's why it's very important to sustain that, even though the primary focus is Krishna consciousness. I mean, to say that that Krishna consciousness should itself sustain a commitment to remaining pious. That's why Prabhupada translates it. Those who have acted piously in this life and in previous lives means it has to continue. It's not that you give up piety by taking to Krishna consciousness. Neither do you give up gyan by taking to Krishna consciousness. But Krishna consciousness is characterized by both of those, by its very nature, independently of each. Okay?
Thank you, Prabhu.
Now, I just want to add one more thing.
Prabhu, if I can ask a question.
Oh, one more question?
Go ahead, Amritanand Prabhu.
Just a small one to clarify. So you said that even piety could be a stumbling block, like those brahmanas, the Mudvidri, they're content and happy. So is lollyum or greed for more and more service, is that the antidote?
If you actually have that lollyum, but the lollyum is not so easy thing to attain, real lollyum, because we have lollyum for so many things in this world. We have lollyum to become, recognized as a great devotee. We have greed to attain a certain platform of pseudo Krishna consciousness. I mean, as we sustain in ISKCON over many years, we realize that the primary motivators for our endeavors in Krishna consciousness in previous years were completely mundane. This is the revelation that comes by Krishna's grace. If we are advancing, we see that the anarthas that I had 10 years ago, I don't have them anymore. But that means that 10 years ago, what used to inspire me was actually mundane. And so what is my condition today? We have to question like this. We don't really realize how conditioned we are. And so it's not so easy thing to decide that I have lollyum now or I don't have lollyum now. Lollyum is a very, very exalted thing. That lollyum that Rupa Goswami is speaking about in Padyavali, that's a very, very exalted thing. But in principle, the idea is that, yes, to really desire pure Krishna consciousness, that is an antidote for sure for complacency that is produced of the mode of goodness, or even merely sattvic Krishna consciousness. But the point is that one should make sure that it's real lollyum and not pseudo lollyum. Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, I'm fresh in my mind because we were discussing him yesterday. He spent the majority of his Krishna conscious career, preaching career, that is to say, by attacking pseudo Krishna consciousness. That was the prime focus of his preaching efforts. Pseudo Krishna consciousness, because he found that was the chief, antagonist to the Sankirtan movement in his time, place, and circumstance. Particularly, he was constantly poking on the Prakriti Sahajyas and the caste Goswamis, both of whom were supposedly devotees, but each of which were overrun by anarthas, subtle or gross. So it's very, very important to really understand what is the depth of this real lollyum and what is the depth of pure Krishna consciousness. These discussions are necessary in order to help us focus like that. And as I said, I think we're going to have to spend some more time on this verse alone because I hardly even touched the commentaries that are on this verse. We're just discussing a part of Srila Prabhupada's purport, and there's really so much more. It's up to you people. You have to decide what the agenda is, but there's so much more to say about this. So yes,
Prabhu. Next Sunday and following Sunday, so we continue on the same. Yes, we want to get to the detail so that we understand and apply it. That's the idea.
It helps to go deep into each verse because every one of them is so deep. And as I said, there's extensive commentary by virtually all of the acharyas. At least half a dozen acharyas give exhaustive commentary on this verse and on this beginning section of Ajamila Bhakyan. Okay, so
yes, in the next two classes, maybe you can more pinpoint more on the anartha nivrutti and how we can, if you can help us out, that will be very beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, that's coming
at least for me.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
All right. So then, now we'll thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Namo Namah. Vaishnava ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Okay.